Listener discretion is advised. It's a me problem, not a hat problem.
Yeah. You are listening to Wine and Crime, the podcast where three friends chug wine, chat true crime, and unleash their worst Minnesotan accents.
You gosh darn right. You
I
darn
decided to go for the accent for the whole intro this
Lean
time.
into it.
Yeah. My furnace went out. My house is freezing.
Nailed it.
I'm wearing a winter hat, a very cute Wine and Crime winter hat, branded.
Cutie.
In my own home.
Yeah.
For warmth.
Like you do.
I'm wearing a faux fur stole.
I'm wearing the Lizzo shirt that I fell asleep in last night.
Mm-hmm.
And you would know this if you were a Patreon donor and watching the video right now.
You'd also know how great my nails look.
Oh my God. they
Ooh,
look
wow.
amazing.
I got a Christmas mani.
Oh my God.
My toes are also green glitter. I have Grinchy toes.
Good Lord.
I know.
I don't think I could pull that off.
I can't, but who's seeing my feet?
Glittery green. Okay. Who
Me
are we?
and the people that I showed on Instagram. Oh, yeah, hi.
Who's going to see it? Oh, right. I
gonna see
posted
my
on
feet?
Instagram.
Me and all of the
Who
internet.
am I trying to impress besides my 25 million followers?
I wish it was 25 million. That would validate me so deeply.
Yes, it
Would
would.
it, or would you just want 26?
That, both of those things.
Where's the
Kenyan.
lie?
Oh, yeah, she's Kenyan.
Oh, I'm Lucy.
I'm Amanda. I am the vapid one.
So we have a very special fan pick this week, brought to you by the very patient Paul Schultz.
Paul, let us tell you.
We are so
scoured for cases. And this was the hardest research we've ever done.
Yeah, it was. Well, let's
and
get
I kept
to the topic.
trying to find something more like scintillating even after we adjusted the topic, but I really couldn't. But I do really like my case, but it's really sad.
It was tough.
Yeah. This was a
So
challenge.
what we've landed on for Paul's pick is deceptive DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So cases where like DNA was used in the investigation or in the trial, but maybe used incorrectly,
Mm-hmm. Or maybe led people
was a red
astray.
herring.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
A red
Flaky
herring
red
DNA.
herring.
So pretty exciting because sometimes I think we think about DNA in these cases and are like, well, there you have it.
Yeah,
The
I
case
didn't
closed.
realize
Lie.
how
Right.
problematic that way of thinking really is until we did this episode, honestly. So it's like completely changed how I look at DNA.
We'll get to it.
Yeah, I'm excited for
Yeah.
your segment
Yeah,
for sure.
DNA. Yeah.
But first, let's get some booze
Yeah.
in our bellies.
Okay, this
Amanda,
is
what is our wine crime pairing?
it is the most exciting, glorious, stunning wine pairing of all time. So today we're pairing wine with our motherfucking faces on it.
Hell yeah. We got wine.
We have custom wine.
Since wine is clearly in our DNA,
Yes.
we decided to make some. I'm going to
Yes.
hold this like my baby because it's literally our baby.
Oh, yeah. It's the thing I'm most proud of.
You're mommy's special girl. Yes, you are. You're mommy's special girl. Okay. My dog's getting confused. So, we partnered with Blentique Wine Co. out of California, which is this absolutely amazing wine company where you can literally get your own blending kits and craft your own wines. So, like, date night has just come to a completely new level in quarantine, people. So get
And
on
by
it.
date night, we mean
Alone
a
night.
Zoom call with your best friends.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with their guidance and our drinking expertise, we put together 3 wines: the Gals Rosé,
Oh,
which
yeah.
if you are on Patreon, you can see.
Look at that
on this
label.
So
I
stunning.
just love
Danielle
the
did
label
such a good
so
job.
much.
The Gals Red Blend,
Mm-hmm.
another absolutely gorgeous, beautiful baby. And yes, the Gals Chardonnay.
Yeah. We did it, y'all. We went there.
Really good.
Yeah.
It's really good. And you know what? Life is all about learning, growing, admitting when you've been wrong.
I mean, we haven't been wrong. This is not a traditional Chardonnay. It drinks more like a Sauv Blanc.
It's not your granny's Chardonnay.
Yeah, it's not your grandma's butter bomb. It is so delicious. And these wines can be enjoyed by you, beautiful listener, if you head to wineandcrimepodcast.com/wine. So check that out. You can order it online. They mail it to you. It's a whole thing. It's very exciting, and we're very excited. Today, in particular, I'm featuring the Gals Rosé because I had a bottle already open, and I'm not about to waste a single fucking drop. And yes, it's like 11:15 in the morning as we're recording this, and this wine is so good and so perfect as a before noon treat.
I was going to say, rosé is, it's a daytime.
Rosé before noon is very French.
You can't rosé all day if you don't start in the morning.
Correct.
Right?
Thank you.
Just saying.
So this is a Central Coast, California 2019 Pinot Noir Rosé, which is one of my personal favorite rosé varietals. It's just so perfect. Pinot Noir is so perfect for rosé. It's a gorgeous blush pink. It's light and drinkable, but it doesn't lose any of its complexity. Like when you think of a light rosé, you're worried that it's just going to be like no flavor. But this is so nice and balanced and layered and gets so many nice complex flavors.
It's not too sweet.
Yeah. It's awesome. It has like a little bit of tart fruit on the front end, but it finishes super clean and dry. So it's really, really nice with food. Hi. Yum.
It's all the best things about rosé, just
It
wrapped
really
up into
is.
one.
I'm very proud of this rosé.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a rosé to be adored all year round, let me tell you. She clocks in at a sweet 13% ABV and is a popper. And what better way to open a wine and crime wine than with a friggin' wine and crime nice pop wine key?
Oh,
which you can get on our online store, wineandcrimepodcast.bigcartel.com. But I will not be using a wine key today, since, like I said, this bottle is already open, so I'm going to be pulling the cork out with my teeth like a lady. So shall we pop?
I just keep gazing at these bottles.
I know.
I love them so much.
They're so pretty.
Yeah.
I'm about to lose a crown. You ready?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh my God, she's actually doing it.
Oh!
Are you okay?
I chipped a tooth. Just kidding. I didn't chip a tooth. I'm fine. I also have not been able to locate my wine glasses yet, so I'm just drinking out of this Don Ho Polynesian Palace
huge.
glass.
I thought it was a pint glass.
I mean, it basically is.
It's like 2/3 of a pint. There she goes.
Oh my
there
God.
she goes.
There's the rest of that bottle.
I'm not driving today. It's COVID-19. It's
All right.
11:20.
Well, drink
AM.
up.
We're getting our work done early today, so drink
Yes.
up, baby.
Oh, I'm saving this. I'm gonna make this into. I'm gonna do one of those
Make it
annoying
into a lamp.
crafts where I'm gonna fill it with lights.
A Christmas tree made out of our own faces.
Yeah. Zach keeps like listing people that we should give these wines to, and I keep being like, but they're mine.
I'll send them a link where they can buy their fucking own.
But I want to keep all of them. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
well,
cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Yeah, this is. I made mistakes.
It's okay. You've done worse.
Okay, Lucy, what is our background and maybe psych for deceptive DNA?
No psych. I can tell you right now, there's no psych. Moving on.
Okay, so I'd like to start out by saying my word a day email the other day was consanguineous. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
You're
which
a
means
consanguineous.
exactly. Which means related by blood, which I felt like was related to this topic and also fun to say if I'm saying it correctly. Consanguineous.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid, nailed it, is a molecule composed of two polynucleotide chains that coil around each other to form a double helix, carrying genetic instructions for the development, functioning, growth, and reproduction of all known organisms, and many viruses. So that pesky COVID probably has a little double helix of its own.
Maybe.
I don't know. There's no way to know. We know nothing about this virus also.
I
Except
mean,
that
I think it's kind of like a disco ball
it'll kill you.
with little disco ball
It's literally
hairs.
my Sputnik light fixture that's in my kitchen.
Right.
I
That's
mean, with
my COVID homage.
well, within that spiky ball,
Oh, is the helix?
I think so.
Okay.
Who knows? There's no way to know. DNA and ribonucleic acid, or RNA, are nucleic acids, alongside proteins, lipids, and complex carbohydrates, or polysaccharides. Nucleic acids are one of the 4 major types of macromolecules that are essential for all known forms of life.
This is bringing me back to a test in high school biology.
Miss Walker.
That
where
the only way I
I
passed was Jessica, like, cobbling me through my studying,
I
dragging me
passed
through it.
because I sat down. I missed the class day where we had the test because I had a dentist appointment or something.
Lucky.
And then had to come back in and take the test later in the day.
Yeah.
And I sat down and looked at the questions, realized that I was going to abominably fail this test, and faked anaphylactic shock. I literally sat there and just started scratching myself all over, making my skin bright red, scratching.
You
I
are.
know.
That's kind of crazy.
I know.
Well done.
And then I went to the teacher and was like, I had a doctor's appointment earlier today, and I think I'm having a reaction.
Oh my lord.
And she was like, go, and then I
It's
went home
fine.
and
Just
studied and then
go.
took the test later.
Well, I passed biology because I sat in between Blortney and Jessica.
Oh, you really, yeah.
Yeah, you
I
had,
scooped.
You had 2 solid crutches to get you through that
Yeah.
marathon.
That was also the class where, let's say, Plan Flendel sat right behind me, and we were working at our lab desks one day, and he just opened a drawer, pulled out a bean burrito, and ate it. We were like,
Was it even his?
Who knows?
no
Way to
explanation.
know. Great.
He offered no information. But I saw it with mine own eyes.
It did happen.
This was the year he had his jaw wired shut.
Oh, that was a weird time for Plan Blendle.
Okay.
Anyway, Tonka 05.
Go Skippers.
Swiss dude Johann Friedrich Meischer was the first to identify nucleic acid in our white blood cells in 1869. Nice.
How?
Nice.
I don't know. Magic?
Yeah,
Had to have
literal
been.
magic. Got it.
They barely had microscopes.
Yeah.
I know. University of Cambridge biologists Francis Crick and James Watson, ever heard of him, who first proposed the double helix structure of DNA in a 1953 issue of Nature magazine. So they were the ones who were like, okay,
This is
we know
legit.
that there's something called nucleic acid, but now we know the structure of it so we can understand how it works.
Got it.
Okay.
A few decades later, British geneticist Sir Alec Jeffreys made a breakthrough discovery that led him to develop DNA profiling. That technology came into wider use in 1986 and immediately helped authorities convict a man of 2 rapes and murders committed within the past 3 years. So they
Wow.
implemented that shit. Also, I'd like to point out that it's all dudes who are credited with this. There's no doubt in my mind that
Yep.
Yeah.
women were actually behind
Women.
a lot of these discoveries.
Yeah.
As
Just
Annie
not
Lennox
getting
and
credit.
Aretha Franklin said in the acclaimed musical song, Sisters Are Doing It for Themselves, behind every great man, there has to be a great,
Great
woman.
woman.
Exactly. Also, I'm pretty sure women got us to the moon.
Yeah.
So DNA is nothing. So the most basic thing we can tell from DNA is the sex of a person, the binary sex, whether someone is male or female. If they have X and Y chromosomes, they're male, and if they have pairs of X chromosomes, they're female. So
In the eyes of DNA in the binary.
eyes of chromosomes.
Yep.
Yeah.
We will get deep into this shit because I think this is sort of where Paul kind of wanted us to go with the topic when it comes to non-binary, intersex, trans people and DNA analysis, because there's it gets.
Or like if somebody's DNA was like left at the scene and the DNA would indicate a certain type of biological sex, but somebody's gender expression or identity was different than that biological sex, that could lead investigators down the wrong, path. I think that's what Paul was hoping we would find a case of. I couldn't find a case like that.
I couldn't either, because unless you're J.K. Rowling and you're inventing like a trans serial killer,
yeah.
Buffalo Bill is like not a thing.
Couldn't find it. I found cases where like there were suspects who happened to be trans, but that didn't impact the investigation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's get into it right now. This XX and XY chromosome thing, of course, oversimplifies biological gender because we also have intersex individuals. It's a whole spectrum. So intersex means that there is a discrepancy between the external and internal genitals, i.e. the testes and the ovaries. Intersex people are individuals born with any of several variations in sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads. I forget that that's a real scientific
It's like
word.
a term.
It's so ridiculous.
I know.
Yeah, gonad is always a surprise word.
Because like high school football coaches ruined it for everyone
Yeah.
by like saying don't kick him in the gonads or whatever.
Gonads. Blech. Sex hormones or genitals that, according to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, quote, do not fit the typical definitions for male or female bodies. This range of atypical variation may be physically obvious from birth, so babies may have ambiguous reproductive organs, or at the other extreme range, it is not obvious and may remain unknown to people all their lives. It is a very complete spectrum.
Or not known until somebody, reaches like adolescence or like puberty, and then things aren't playing out as they would expect.
Yeah. When that hormone expression time, that magical time in someone's life,
The blooming of your hormones.
that is that's frequently where these sorts of cases are discovered.
Yeah.
But like I said, it could be super obvious or it could be super not obvious, and you'd never know that you're intersex.
Right.
So intersex can be divided into 4 categories. We have XX intersex, which means that the person has ovaries or ovary types inside their body, but externally it appears to be more like a penis. And the difference between a penis and a vagina, it's, again, kind of a spectrum. It's kind of wild, but yeah, there's we could go both ways with this. Then we have XY intersex, which means there are testes or testy-like
Apparatus.
apparati, and then what appears to be a vagina. And then true gonadal intersex, which it is possible to have both XX and XY in this case. This type of intersex is like 50-50. It's like totally a dude and totally a chick at the same time.
Neither, or both.
Exactly. And we have the category of complex or undetermined intersex, which, again, it's a fucking spectrum.
A lot of
We're all over the
possibilities.
place. Lots of possibilities.
And also more common than one might think. And I don't have any statistics in front of me, but I feel like ranges of various intersex possibilities, a lot more common than one might think.
I think that when, like we were talking about, when we think about DNA and like, sort of like if the glove fits, you must acquit, or like things are tied up in a neat little bow. That is almost never the case. Like DNA, evolution, biology, it's a lot messier than we would probably like to think, but all of these things are possible. They happen frequently. It's not just in humans either. It's just every living organism that has this, the DNA. Whatever. Okay, so there are a ton of causes and variations when it comes to intersex individuals, and I won't go into it now, but as we've been saying, just know that gender is complicated, to say nothing of gender identity and expression.
Gender on a DNA level is complicated enough.
And we're still learning more about the science behind it, and for the purposes of this episode, what I just want to get across, a simple DNA sample might be anything but. So what else can DNA tell us? This is a quote from The Guardian. It can tell us hair color.
Wait a minute.
Not you.
Doubt it.
Not in your case.
Again, not hair color expression.
Hair color identity.
Fair.
Many redheads have a different version of a gene that prevents pigment-producing cells called melanocytes, responding to a hormone that instructs them to make a dark pigment. A DNA sample from someone carrying 2 of the mutated genes has a 96% probability of being naturally red-haired.
Wow.
A DNA test developed by the Forensic Science Service can identify 8 common mutations of this gene that have the same effect of stopping it from working. So if you have that natural redhead gene, we can see it in your DNA. That'll be on your criminal profile.
That'll
The
be on the
carpet
test.
does match the drapes.
God. Okay, we can also tell eye color. At least 4 genes work together to determine your eye color. By analyzing these genes, scientists can classify someone into one of 3 eye color groups. We have the light group, which is blue and gray eyes. We would all fall into the light group. Dark, which is black or brown. And then hazel is the third category, and that they can determine that with 97% certainty.
So hazel would include green, I'm guessing? Hazel green?
Yeah. That pretty golden greeny brown.
That's what Zach has. The asshole.
Attention. Okay, it can also detect attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD.
Guilty.
This condition has been linked with a genetic stutter in the gene DAT1, which is involved in nerve impulses. So when I say a genetic stutter, I'm talking about like when you look at that chunk of DNA. A blimp? Are we back to blimps?
A blimp.
A blip.
Blimp.
Not a blimp.
I got excited. I liked our blimp.
As someone who has this blimp, can confirm.
Oh my God. Okay. It can also determine your body clock. The PER2 gene has been linked with advanced sleep phase syndrome. So that is wanting to go to bed early and wake up early. I don't have that. Another gene, the PER3, is found more often in night owls.
Yeah,
that was super
PER3.
interesting.
Represent.
Although I am starting to change, but up until...
People don't really change.
You can't change your DNA, honey.
That's true.
You
can't run from it.
I think maybe I just have depression and a really good mattress.
Yep.
So now I'm just sleeping more.
That's a dangerous combo.
Yeah.
It's the mattress, though.
I fucking love my purple mattress, and they are not even paying for an ad on this episode, and I fucking love it.
Yeah. Okay. She's good. Okay, your DNA can also give insight into like the longevity of your life. Particular versions of the Klotho gene. Also, I don't know how the fuck they come up with the names for these like chunks of DNA. But
I have to
whatever.
imagine people who discover them are likely responsible for some of these names,
it's all
attributions.
related.
Well, like some are
numbers, some are names.
numbers. We've got PER2 and PER3 and DAT1 and whatever.
It's like
and then
vitamins.
Klotho.
It's like some vitamins are called by their letters, some are like called by their name, some are called some have numbers and letters like B3 and B6.
I'm not smart enough to know why.
Yeah.
I could have Googled it, but I didn't.
don't care enough to know why.
Okay, so particular versions of the Klotho gene are associated with longevity in humans. It seems to influence age-related conditions such as heart disease and stroke.
This is a frustrating one for a Jacobson child because on the one hand, you've got your dad kicking the bucket at 62.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you've got your grandmother
Grandma Helen.
thriving until 102.
Yeah.
So
Different.
where
maybe
does that leave me?
somewhere in the middle. I think somewhere in the middle. I hope
I just want to make it
you.
to 75
Why?
because that seems like the perfect age. You're still like
75 is still pretty young.
I know.
I think
I'm
85.
shooting low. I'm setting the bar low. You're
I'm
still
surprised
like
you didn't
able
say
to
69.
do things. Well, I mean, I need to make it past 69 so I can tell everyone that I did. But you're still
69 is
like
going to be your year.
mobile and virile in your mid 70s.
Yeah.
Then
You can
things
travel.
you can travel, but things can drop off that cliff pretty quick once you enter into the 80s category.
This is making me sad, so I'm going to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Mortality is sad.
We can also determine your level of thrill-seeking behavior. Certain
0.
versions of a gene on the X chromosome that codes for the monoamine oxidase enzyme, or MAO, are associated with the sensation-seeking and impulsive tendencies.
So that's why I hate roller coasters so much and rides.
Yeah.
It's
not
in my
into it.
DNA.
Corey was like, we were talking about what he was going to get me for Christmas, and he was
Texted
like,
me last night. I know what he's getting you for Christmas. It's amazing.
well, he alluded that it was going to be an activity, that one of the gifts was an activity, and I was like, I don't ever want to go skydiving,
Hot air
bungee jumping.
balloon.
No.
I did the hot air balloon. That's nice because it's very slow moving. Anything fast, skiing, no. I don't like speed.
Desire. No desire.
Speed and heights.
I like skiing, but I don't feel any need to push myself. Like, just give me like a nice, gentle slope.
You're not going to
No.
bomb down the hill.
Yeah, I don't need to get to the next level. I don't need to do a black diamond. I need to like have a nice day out, get some rosy cheeks, have some
Spend
cocoa in a hot tub.
58% of it in the lodge
Yeah.
and go down the hill 4 or 5 times maximum.
Yeah.
Max.
Yep.
I don't have time for any more than that. Anyway. Also, my ass gets super sore from skiing. One day,
You're like
honestly.
crouching all day.
Yeah, it's not for me. Movement is not for me. It can also determine propensity for diseases like Huntington's, breast cancer, cystic fibrosis, or certain forms of bowel cancer. So I thought it was kind of interesting that at this point, we can't test and determine like a lot of disease propensities from your DNA, but I mean,
Probably more and
Huntington's,
more
holy
each
shit.
day.
I suppose if there was one disease that I'm aware of, it would be Huntington's that I would want to know.
Well, yeah, there are a lot. There are some that we probably haven't even heard of.
I was diagnosed with diabetes through genetic testing.
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Pretty cool. So they caught it before I had any symptoms. My mom was taking my dad to like an eye appointment. He had to get like his eyes dilated or something so he couldn't drive. And there was a pamphlet because it was at like Fairview at the U of M. And being like, do you have, children of diabetic parents? Blah, blah, blah. Enter into this study. So my sister and I went into this study and it like tested for all these different like genetic components, mostly an antibody that indicates whether or not you're like a carrier of diabetes. And I had the antibody and Ashley didn't. So I stayed in the study and I just had glucose tolerance testing like every 6 months until my blood sugar elevated and they put me on insulin.
Wow.
Well, that's good that they were able to preempt it. I mean,
Yeah.
you still have
Before you get really
diabetes,
fucking
but,
sick
like,
from it.
Yeah.
Right. Because, having it go untreated for a long time can really suck.
But with Scott, he developed symptoms, right?
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
he doesn't have a parent that has it. Okay.
DNA can also help us solve ancient mysteries, my favorite. This is from
Ancient
CNN.
Aliens.
Ugh. Aliens.
The best show.
No one knew where Richard III, one of the most famous kings of England, was buried until his remains were discovered in a parking lot in Leicester.
Just like sitting in an old Toyota Camry or like under the ground.
They were underneath the parking
So they weren't in a parking lot. They were under a parking
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Get it right, CNN.
Okay. The remains showed evidence of battle wounds and scoliosis, but scientists weren't sure the skeleton was Richard III's until DNA extracted from the bones was matched to a guy named Michael Ibsen, who was known to be a direct descendant of the king's sister.
Oh, cool. That's some Golden State Killer shit.
So
Familial DNA.
I feel like this happened relatively recently, and I think that they were digging up the parking lot to
Build a mall.
redo it.
On top of Richard
They
III.
paved paradise to put in a parking lot.
They paved Richard III to put
Paved a hunchbacked evil king to put up a parking lot.
Yep.
Yeah, he was bad.
Wow.
This wasn't the first.
Like a perfectly disrespectful, awful legacy for such a monster of a person.
Imagine if he was haunting that parking lot.
Just found hundreds of years
England is
later
like
under a parking lot.
Not that big, and it's got a lot of history. So, like, it's probably
Every
true
parking
of
lot
everything.
has a sinister ex-ruler under it, possibly.
Well, we can only hope that one day all of us will be buried under a parking lot.
I want to be found under a parking lot at some point.
That would be really on brand for you.
It really would. I request that church parking lot in Excelsior that I used to sneak out to have sex with my high school boyfriends in.
I feel like you have I know that parking lot. I feel like you have a solid 40% chance of being buried under a parking lot.
I think so too, especially if I craft a line about this in my will.
Yeah. Vegas odds.
Yeah. Tip the scales.
So this wasn't the first time ancient remains have been identified using DNA. If it's stored in a cold, dry, dark place, DNA can last for thousands of years.
So can your wine. So make sure that you are storing it properly.
Oh, yeah.
Out of direct sunlight, 52 degrees.
In 2009, a DNA analysis of some bone fragments showed 2 of Tsar Nicholas II's children were killed alongside the rest of the family during the Russian Revolution, despite speculation that they could have escaped.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
Scientists have even extracted DNA from Neanderthals who went extinct about 30,000 years ago in hopes of gaining insight into the evolution of humans.
Cool.
That is so gnarly to me. Mm-hmm. So when establishing a binary gender, all an investigator needs to do is to look at one pair of chromosomes as opposed to a full DNA sequence. Again, this is oversimplification, especially if the individual happens to be intersex or trans, as opposed to a full DNA sequence. When looking for other characteristics, a sequence is required, so a technician will snip up the DNA using enzymes called restriction endonucleases, which cut the DNA only when they come across a specific sequence. So you can
It's like a control F.
Yeah,
it is like a control F.
How they figured this out, I'll never be able to wrap my head around. Science is
that's what I don't
amazing
understand.
and ridiculous.
It's like, that's what always stopped me. It's like, okay, great. This all kind of makes sense and you can memorize it and whatever, and you can have questions, but nuts and bolts, how did you even get this far?
Right.
I don't understand. My brain stops at okay, there's a lens that magnifies things and you can see tiny things. That's it.
Yep.
What
That's
did you get on that bio
stops.
test?
How did you pass that bio test? Speaking of how.
Speaking of things I'll never understand.
Because I can tell you exactly how I passed bio. Cheating and absolutely charming my teachers into raising my grade an increment so that I could graduate.
Yep.
Boom. Notice studying was not mentioned.
So yeah, these enzymes just seek out specific patterns in all of that DNA. And they're like, oh, here's a little redhead. Put them all together. This person has, 42 points towards redhead. And then our, the suspect's DNA that we found at the scene of the crime, they only have 22 blah, blah, blah of redhead
So
or
it
whatever
can't be
the
a match.
specific characteristic is. So that's not a match.
Right.
So, if everyone's DNA were the same, then the pieces left over after this frenzy of molecular slicing would all be the same length. But there are repeated sections of DNA that vary considerably between individuals. So that means that the lengths of my cut fragments are unlikely to be the same as your cut fragments because we have a different number of repeats. So that's how they determine one individual from another.
And those repeats are what develop like our traits, like our blue eyes or our blonde hair, etc.
Yep, exactly.
Got it. All right, I could have passed that one question on a bio test. I studied that for 1 second.
If Miss Walker is listening to this,
Mr. Hessian.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Hessian.
We were not kind to you, Mr. Hessian.
I liked him. Okay. By combining several of these variable locations in the genome, scientists can say with very high confidence that a match between a DNA profile found at a crime scene and the profile of a suspect are not the same simply by chance. The probability of two unrelated people having the same profile coincidentally depends on how many variable DNA regions you use, but it is typically 1 in several billion.
Yeah.
So just not possible, really.
But in my case, and obviously I'll get to it, where the issue lies is that in a lot of crime scenes, you get partial matches because you don't have enough DNA from, say, the suspect
To do a full
to
sequence.
put together a full spectrum. And so that's where you can get into some very, very murky water with pointing fingers at people because those partial matches are not solid science. They're not solid evidence, I mean. Not good.
Here's a quick fun fact for you. National DNA Day is April 25th, marking the anniversary of both the discovery of the double helix as well as the completion of the Human Genome Project, which I started looking at that and it just
It's mind-blowing.
blew my fucking mind, so I couldn't do it. When it comes to the future of DNA technology, the possibilities are endless. We already know that DNA can be a predictor of the future, so in the near future, we should be able to affordably screen things like non-invasive prenatal testing and develop personalized medicine for optimal therapy. Cancer research will be at the forefront of DNA testing since we already know that there are at least those two forms of cancer
are predictable. Somewhat.
Obviously, the capture of Joseph D'Angelo, Golden State Killer, thanks to a genetic testing kit, has proven its forensic worth already, and we're sure to see more advances in that arena in the coming years as well. Also, litigation surrounding that, I feel. It's going to be messy.
This is why it's also so important when you do your own familial DNA and do things like 23andMe that you also allow for that information to be shared.
Well, I think that's a personal decision. Because
I think so too, but I think
ways.
It's important to do.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
because
I think I would do it.
Yeah. Obviously, it's, consent is key, but I think it's so important because then that's exactly how the Golden State Killer got found. And there are so many cold cases from times before DNA was really well understood that could be solved if more people were willing to share that information. But yes, I do understand, but
I do see people my hesitancy is just giving police who we know are, fallible fellow human beings, all kinds of information.
I feel like I
power
already
that.
do that by having an iPhone. So how could it get worse?
Right.
I have Facebook and an iPhone. They already know everything about me, except where my double helix lengths are.
I think that's where I ultimately come down. But yeah, I can just see people being like, no, drawing a line there.
I think it depends also. I mean, clearly a personal choice. A lot of when I was doing this research, a couple of different forums about genetic testing, like the 23andMe. I saw a lot of questions posed from trans or intersex people who were like, well, my gender doesn't come down to XX or XY. What if I want to have all this information about my extended family, but I don't want to share my information with them? just say you're trans and you don't want to be like, I was born a male, like it's just everybody has a different prerogative. So yeah, I think it's really cool that we are able to do this. But as far as like,
I respect the choice. That's totally fair. I should rephrase that. It's important to me that, and I have a DNA kit that I just haven't done yet.
Same, yeah.
And I plan on doing it. Bill and I both have them. I want to do them like around Christmas. And I also want to have the conversation with him that's like, hey, we should, if like we're both comfortable doing this, we should share this.
Yeah.
Information.
It's gonna be different for everyone.
because I know that I'm the secret love child.
Lucky. That's so unfair.
Some dude who has legitimate children out there. For a long time, I was like, I don't want to fuck up their thing.
They're all adults. Fuck them up.
But
If they're all
ran my
adults,
dad's
blow
email.
his shit up.
After the
So
Ashley
now,
Madison hack,
that's
I
where
ran
I'm
my
at.
dad's email through the Ashley Madison hack. My sister and I were like, all right, he's dead. Let's see if he had any affairs. No hits.
None.
That's
There is-
really disappointing.
There is no like
He's a loyal
titillating, scintillating hot tea in my immediate family.
No.
It is so boring and frustrating.
It's all out there. Your family has no shame.
No affairs, no shame. So fucking loyal. Their marriage was super solid. It's really annoying. And I hate it.
I vote for
Such
Kenyon
a great example
to,
for a partnership. I am so annoyed.
I vote for Kenyon to blackmail the shit out of her sperm donor.
Well, now it's too late because I finally, in the last year, was like, you know what? Fuck this dude.
Yeah.
And added what I know of his name and his
Yeah,
side
to your
to
family
my
tree.
ancestry.com. So
It's only a matter of time.
It's only a matter of time.
Have you checked your inbox recently?
no, I have not.
Check your
Maybe
spam.
log in during the ad
Check
break.
Your spam. Okay, last little tidbit I'm going to say. Also, the testing does go beyond human subjects. As we said, DNA is present in all living organisms.
Carbon-based life forms, yeah.
So we can learn more about animal and plant evolution and expression as well. I'm sure that will eventually be used in like growing food to solve world hunger, etc. And like
It already is.
becoming more useful. I'm excited for like animal meat, like plant, like
Beyond
like
burgers
meat
and shit.
it's not even just plant-based. It's just like you're creating beef
Yeah, I think there's a
Without
lot of like
killing a cat. You know what I mean?
there's a lot of pushback about like not buying non-GMO, and I do understand the like knee-jerk fear about genetically modified food products, and also being careful of like how that process is going and how that could alter the the foundation of the food into a potentially problematic or unhealthy thing to consume. However, it is very important technology to explore for exactly the reason that Lucy just said about like make our food. The way that we grow food right now is not sustainable because of the way that we like plow through water and how we're developing land and how we're like fucking tapping for oil and like building oil pipelines and all of this shit that we're going to need to have some kind of concise plan for like small footprint farming with genetically modified plant and possibly animal matter that
Right.
produces more without having to use more.
And
of our
potentially
Earth's
can avoid
resources.
other problematic things like certain pesticides and exactly like
So before you're
inefficient
like,
water use and
non-GMO everything, it's like, okay, I understand being critical of these practices, but also that this could be the very technology that like
Saves the
that
planet.
saves the planet. So there's
and
it's
it's kind
it's
of just an
complex.
extension of human farming, the evolution of like human farming techniques for thousands of years. Like we've always been tweaking
right how we do it.
our crops.
I think
over
the
time.
ethics behind like GMO and adjacent practices are within that's about the process and not necessarily the practice.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well,
I
yeah,
just
like
think like we need to empower the FDA to like actually have the budget and resources to like actually monitor practices to make sure that they are safe. And if that is happening, if there's actual regulations in place, then I don't have a problem with it. If I can trust that things are being well regulated.
Because, I also grapple with the ethics of like genetically modifying a fucking chicken to the point where it has like a horrific life just to get extremely fat and feed extra people. Like
to make an extra 80 cents off of one chicken.
Like I get that. And chicken as a meat is also already one of the most sustainable and like lowest water sucking meat products. So like chicken is a good protein, but like I get the ethics of that shit. I totally get it.
When you're modifying an animal.
I have more of a problem with that than plants.
But if it's like a tomato, if you're like, look, we grew this tomato, it's tastier, it's bigger, it doesn't need pesticides.
And it uses less water or whatever, great.
Fucking dope.
Totally.
I saw once where they were able to modify, I think it was tomatoes or some fruit or vegetable. Instead of being round, they modified them so they were square, so they could fit more in a box.
Yeah.
So it saved them on shipping and also, theoretically like carbon footprint.
Yeah, that's a little
more of them in there. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. All right. I think we've gotten way off topic.
I gotta go Google square potatoes, tomatoes, and potatoes.
I gotta fix my camera.
My case is one where DNA was relied upon too heavily. Yes. Okay. So around midnight on the evening of November 29th, 2012, 66-year-old Ravish Kumra was at home watching CNN with his ex-wife, Harinder. His ex-wife was asleep upstairs. Ravish and Harinder had divorced 2 years prior after 30 years of marriage, but they chose to remain living together, and it was an arrangement that worked well for them. Didn't hurt that the home that they were sharing was a 7,000 square foot mansion.
So you can easily stay away from each other.
I'll be in the East Wing.
Yeah. So I think they just were wealthy. They'd been married for 30 years and they like didn't want to fuck up their finances. And they were like, whatever, we'll just.
Whatever.
Yeah. Their house was located in the wealthy enclave of Monte Sereno, about 10 miles outside of downtown San Jose, California. Ravish, a wealthy businessman, was friendly and outgoing with the neighbors and considered to be sort of an unofficial mayor of the town. So everybody liked him. He was really, man about town.
Convivial.
Yeah. So on November 29th, like I said, 2012, that night, a group of men broke into the home, tied up Ravish, who was downstairs watching TV, and covered his mouth with duct tape. And oddly, the duct tape used wasn't just like plain normal duct tape. It had like a repeating mustache print on it. It was like novelty duct tape.
I got so much novelty duct tape from Bill's grandma last Christmas. We went to her house for sort of middle of the road Thanksgiving-ish Christmas dinner. And she had all of these. It was basically like a grab bag hodgepodge of stocking stuffers that were just there for the taking. And Bill like hoarded all of this duct tape that has like puppies and kittens on it. Got me a steering wheel cover that is actually super clutch in the winter, I will say. So thank you. But yeah, a lot of pens attached to keychain rings.
Well, there you go. You can
commit
a home invasion and use your novelty puppies and kittens duct tape.
This is 1,000% the duct tape I would use were I to tape up a person in a violent way.
In a violent way or sexual way.
Look at the puppies.
So remember, this is a true crime podcast,
right?
And my cases are dark. So duct tape, funny, back to dark. The intruders then went upstairs and dragged Harinder from her bed, bringing her downstairs and sit beside Ravish. They tied her up and blindfolded her, and then they ransacked the home in search of jewelry and cash. So they didn't beat either of them. They weren't it's a home invasion and very awful and startling, but they weren't physically attacking either of them. After the burglars left, Harinder managed to get free from her bindings and made her way to the kitchen phone and dialed 911, Queen. But by the time the police arrived, Ravish was already dead. He had been presumably inadvertently suffocated by the mustachioed duct tape.
Oh, no.
So, they hadn't meant to kill him, but they just duct taped him so quickly.
No.
Yes.
Ugh.
So, the case was an obvious burglary gone horribly wrong. Ravish did not appear to have been targeted for murder. And items of high value were stolen from the home.
So this sounds kind of morbid, but also totally something that I would do. When I was younger, I would practice. I would just presume that at some point I would be bound and duct taped.
Of course.
So I would practice getting duct tape off my mouth without using my hands, or just tape, masking tape.
How? Just
move your lips, and then I'd also stick my tongue out really hard and try to get it out. And
and moistening it would help too.
Spit, a lot of spit, a lot of jaw, tongue, lip movement.
good practice.
I was also
I'd be
8,
so good at this.
So
I was also 8.
So you've always been exactly who you are.
I'm a predictable individual.
My uncle taught my little cousin, he's less than a year younger than me, taught my cousin how to escape from a locked car trunk.
Without that emergency handle?
I don't know. My aunt came home one day and she was like, "Where's Jake?" And he was like, "I'm in here," in the trunk, and was mid learning how to get out of the car trunk.
Oh, geez.
Having the best time.
Your uncle to be my uncle.
He has a very special set of skills.
Yeah.
Okay, so the fact that Ravish, the Kumras were not targeted for murder, they were just targeted for their wealth, for their money, made the work of investigators a bit harder because it was a somewhat random crime. It was okay, well, somebody wanted jewelry and cash, so they went to a big fancy house.
Right.
But we can't just investigate people that they knew necessarily. So there weren't a bunch of initial leads. But just 3.5 weeks later, police had a suspect in custody. 26-year-old Lucas Anderson was homeless at the time of the murder, and he is a black man.
Mm-hmm.
He typically spent his days asking for change in downtown San Jose before just being suddenly arrested for the murder of Ravish Kumra. So he was just
out of nowhere, the cops were like, "Here's a black homeless man. Let's get him."
Well, the coroner had found DNA under Ravish's fingernails, and investigators surmised, pretty logically, that it had to be from one of the men who had broken into the house and with whom Ravish must have struggled while they were trying to tie him up. Because if you find third-party DNA under someone's fingernails, you're going to assume that it could be from a struggle. They could be the suspect. Actually, 3 third-party DNA samples were discovered at the crime scene, although mostly the physical evidence was very scant. So they found some, just these 3 other profiles that were not Ravish or Harinder, but there wasn't a ton of physical evidence.
And presumably those profiles were incomplete.
Yes.
Just little bits.
Well, I don't know about that for sure, but it seemed like, yes, they were small amounts.
Partial.
I don't know if they were partial or complete profiles.
Okay.
It sounds like under the fingernails, they were able to say this is Lucas Anderson conclusively.
Okay.
But it wasn't like there were fingerprints everywhere. There wasn't the people who had done this burglary had been fairly smart about it. So after searching the home, investigators concluded that the perpetrators must have been somewhat forensically aware. Mm-hmm. So they had worn latex gloves while, tying up Ravish and Harinder and ransacking the house. And then those gloves were found in the kitchen sink covered with soapy water. As if someone had made an effort to wash the DNA evidence off of them. Mm-hmm. Which I feel like is like somewhat smart, but wouldn't it be smarter to take them
Go somewhere else and throw them away?
Burn them? Yeah.
Well, yeah, because then even if they just have the gloves, they can tell like who the manufacturer was, where they sold them, the size.
Mm-hmm. Right. I also don't know for sure, but I think 2 pairs of gloves were found.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that would...
With 3 DNA profiles at the crime scene, including one under the fingernails.
So there were multiple intruders.
Definitely at least 2. Mm-hmm. The crime lab ran countless tests on the evidence collected from the scene. Most only revealed DNA profiles matching those of Ravish and Harinder, because it's their home. But again, 3 unknown profiles also turned up. Aside from Lucas's DNA under Ravish's fingernails, DNA found on the washed gloves, so they were still able to get DNA from the gloves, matched 21-year-old Javier Garcia, and DNA on the duct tape matched 22-year-old D'Angelo Austin.
Do you know if they just ran the DNA through like CODIS and figured out, well, isn't that the fingerprints?
Yeah.
No, CODIS can be DNA. Yeah.
Did they just run it through some sort of database, or did they have these suspects take their samples and then compare them?
No, they just ran the DNA and found the suspects.
Gotcha.
DNA led to suspects. I'm pretty sure these suspects all had priors. So that's why their DNA was on file in the police system.
Gotcha.
Lucas's DNA was not found on the gloves or the duct tape. His DNA was found under the fingernails.
Okay.
It quickly became clear that there was additional evidence tying both Garcia and Austin to the crime. Both of their cell phone records showed that they had been in the vicinity of the home on the night in question. Garcia and Austin also knew each other. They were like known contacts to one another. And Austin, in particular, had known ties with a gang that had committed a series of home invasions in the past. Then the other shoe dropped when it was discovered that Ravish had several involvements with sex workers. One of his most long-standing connections was with a 32-year-old woman named Karina Fitz, whom he'd been involved with for 12 years by the time of his murder. So he was like a regular of this particular sex worker. And most damningly, Karina Fitz is D'Angelo Austin's older sister.
Oh.
And she would eventually admit to police that she'd told her brother about Ravish's lavish home. So he was a regular client of hers. He lived in a nice home. Her brother was involved in burglaries and home invasions. And she let slip that one of her clients had a lot of money in this big home and what the address was. Tying Lucas Anderson to the crime beyond the DNA under the fingernails, however, proved to be much more difficult. So they had the 2 other guys, and they were like, okay, this kind of makes sense. how they would have been connected, but this Lucas Anderson guy not seeing the immediate connection. He was homeless again, didn't have a cell phone, so his whereabouts on the night couldn't really be checked that way. And he had no known connections to gangs or to the other two suspects.
Okay.
But
this is not adding up.
Well, it's absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Mm-hmm. They can't disprove it yet, but it's not as neat and, cut and dried as the other two.
Mm-hmm.
He did have a previous felony conviction for home burglary, though. So they were like, okay, he's done it before, so keep him in the mix. And eventually, the lead investigator on the case, a man named Aaron Lunsford, came to believe that he'd found a connection between Lucas and the other two men, but it was very tenuous. So, a year earlier, Lucas had been locked up for a parole violation in the same jail as another man. Sorry, lots of names.
Lots of men.
Yeah, I'm like,
too many
it's like
men.
that meme where the lady, the blonde lady, is like looking at all the math equations just floating around in front of her. Just like,
I know. Okay. I'm trying to, I'm really, So he's locked up in the same jail as another dude, you don't need to know his name, who happened to be a friend of Austin's, one of the other suspects. So that's a very tenuous thing, being like, well, this guy knew another guy who knew this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That guy, the middleman, jail guy, was now out on parole wearing an ankle monitor. And it showed that he, 2 days before the murder, had been in downtown San Jose, where Lucas Anderson, as a homeless person, was spending most of his time. Lunsford, the investigator, came to believe that this guy was a middleman in setting up the burglary. So the other two suspects who were buddies had gone to middleman guy and been like, we need a third. Can you find us somebody? And middleman guy was like, yeah, I know this dude. He's homeless, but he can help you out in this home invasion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's tenuous and it's only a theory, but there's something. There's this theory that he recruited his old jailhouse buddy who was experienced in home invasions to help them out on this job.
Mm-hmm.
Theoretically possible, but not necessarily provable. Still, the investigator felt confident in his theory, but people who knew Lucas didn't believe him capable of such a crime. So they were looking into Lucas and they're like, no, really.
There's no way.
He couldn't have done this. So Lucas was a known entity in downtown San Jose. He was just known as a, for lack of a better term, fall down drunk. Really, really struggled with addiction, was not a very functioning alcoholic. But essentially harmless. Mm-hmm. Probably because partially because he was so addicted to alcohol, he couldn't really function.
Mm-hmm. It's a vicious cycle.
So Lucas was known to have a good sense of humor. Several shopkeepers and residents in the area made a point of looking out for him and helping him when they could, because nobody was afraid of him. He did have a long rap sheet, but it was pretty much exclusively for crimes like public intoxication.
Mm-hmm. Racist bullshit.
Mm-hmm. And the residential burglary conviction that the prior for home invasion that we had talked about, that's what the investigator's case kind of hinged on. But then when they examined that exact conviction more closely, it was found to be a lot less sinister than it sounds. So, according to the police report of the incident, Lucas had drunkenly broken a window of a house and tried to crawl inside, possibly to keep warm.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can name 6 white dude friends from college who did exactly
the
that
same
on a
thing.
drunken night, trying to wander home, wandering into the wrong house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. A family had been in the room at the time and just pushed him back out the window with blankets.
Like,
And
nope.
he was so drunk that it wasn't like he was like, "Oh, I'm caught, I better flee." He was
Right.
so drunk that he like didn't even know that he was like being
That they probably didn't even hardly feel that threatened. It's just
Right.
like, dude, here's some blankets. Get out of here.
right. Exactly. They called the police, and the police found him dazed and bleeding right outside the window of the house.
He was just too drunk to do anything that.
And they're counting that as a home invasion.
That's
he got
bullshit.
convicted for home invasion.
At the very worst, it's like a drunken disorderly.
right? Yeah.
Ridiculous.
So this was obviously not an elaborately planned fucking heist.
No.
This was a drunken and disorderly mishap.
And if the two other dudes who did plan and execute this heist, if I were them, I wouldn't want to work with a fucking drunk that's probably going to fuck it up for everyone either.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
if you're calculated enough to try and like wear gloves and be very clean with the DNA and not be
And break into
detectable
like a mansion,
and break into
presumably
a mansion,
with security.
Yeah, you probably want to tap into a little bit more of a consistent and reliable
Yeah.
co-conspirator.
Right.
Yeah.
This is not. Yeah. So. Okay, so the investigator like thinks he's like found this connection, although it's tenuous. Then does more research, realizes that like maybe Lucas Anderson isn't, you know, the perfect co-conspirator for these other two guys who were definitely involved. But we still got that DNA from Lucas under the fingernails of the victim.
How the heck?
Yeah. And then
Maybe he just gave him a really aggressive back scratch.
Well, Lucy solved it. Case closed.
It's just as reasonable as the detectives. Weird little red string theory.
it's true. Sometimes you need to do less.
Less is sometimes more.
Then further complicating matters, poor Lucas Anderson himself was so like addled that he came to believe that he might have committed the murder.
Oh.
Because he couldn't, his heavy drinking
Yeah.
led him to black out.
He didn't remember that he didn't do it.
Right.
Poor guy.
And so although
I mean, unless he did it.
he didn't believe himself capable of doing something so violent, but he also had no memory of the night in question. Also, who has a memory of the night in question when it's been 3.5 weeks and your life is that disordered?
I can't even remember 3.5 weeks ago.
No.
Granted, we are living through COVID, but also every day is the same.
The same.
Right. So Lucas told his lawyer, quote, no, I don't do things like that. And his lawyer's a public defender named Kelly Kupik, I think. So he's like, no, I don't do things like that. And then there was a pause, and then he said, but maybe I did.
Oh.
And after hearing this from her client, the defender was like, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, and
Like-
the prosecution is like, I'm going to exploit that
Yeah.
opening as hard
Yeah.
as I possibly
Right.
can.
So she's like, mm-mm.
You don't even know beyond a reasonable doubt that you didn't
Yeah.
do this.
Right, exactly. So she knew things were not looking good for Lucas, for her client. But then this queen, public defender, made a discovery. She pulled all of Lucas's medical records, believing there might be something in there related to his mental health that would at least allow her to argue for leniency. So she thought that this was like not going to get him out of this, but she was hoping to like be able to avoid the death penalty for him. And what she discovered was that Lucas's drinking had made him a regular at local hospitals.
Oh.
Oh.
And his most recent hospitalization had been on the evening of November 29th.
Hey, alibi.
Hello. Important.
That evening, Lucas drank the equivalent of 21 beers and spent the entire night detoxing before being released the following morning. So the whole night he was documented to have been in this hospital.
Which is like the ultimate alibi. I mean, it's not fun spending a night in the hospital, but like you said, it's so
Who's going to lie and cover up for you?
Well, right. It's so rigorously documented, and they don't have any stakes in lying for this stranger that just was brought into the ER.
Right.
That, like, you really can't get much better than, like, that.
Right.
Also, just the mere thought of 21 beers makes me have to pee so bad.
I don't even know how you could, like, consume that much without just peeing yourself to death.
I'd pee myself to death.
Yeah. Rather than immediate relief, however, this public defender, Kupik, felt shocked. She remembers thinking, quote, to know that you have a factually innocent client sitting in jail facing the death penalty is really scary because you really don't want to screw up. You know, like she's like, okay, this is it. This is the like non-smoking gun. I don't even know what that analogy is.
The frigid the frigid fork. The frigid fork is the opposite of a smoking gun. Okay.
Okay.
The frozen flower.
Neither of those are opposites of
the frozen flower.
The frozen flower.
Frozen is not even a direct opposite of smoking.
What's the opposite of smoking?
I think of it as like smoldering. Like it's a smoking gun because it's so hot.
Flammable shield.
I think frozen flower works.
Let's
let the listeners decide. I'm posting a Twitter poll the day this comes out.
So,
yep.
Kelly.
A chili lamb.
That's your submission?
Yes, a chili lamb.
I like that. So Kelly was like, okay, I have this, but like I still need to back it up because like God forbid it gets thrown out or whatever. She's like, I really need to like reinforce this alibi.
Well, we know how the justice system works, especially against a black man. So it's like, I need more than just the smoking gun in my case.
A broke black man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she worked on retracing his steps that day and speaking to everyone who had seen him that day. She discovered that the people who had called 911 on Lucas, different people had called 911 on Lucas twice that evening because he had been
Clearly
drinking so much. Yeah.
He should go to the hospital.
So one call was made at 7:54 p.m. for panhandling in front of a 7-Eleven.
Fuck off. But okay.
And once around 10:15 p.m. for drunkenly collapsing in an aisle at the grocery store.
This is where I really wish everywhere had the means to call an ambulance without having to call the fucking police.
Right.
It's some places do have like private ambulance services that you can call, but Minneapolis does not have that, and it is so fucking frustrating to try and get just medical attention for somebody, especially a person of color, because the dispatcher asks you those details and then they always send a cop.
Right.
And people die.
People
People
for
get
like
punished
wellness
instead
and
of
mental health checks.
instead of helped. Yeah.
Yes. It's anyway, it's very frustrating.
So this second call was the call that resulted in his hospitalization. So he was admitted at 10:45 p.m. and was at the hospital throughout the night. But obviously he still had this alibi from 7:54 p.m. Until arriving at the hospital. Mm-hmm. Despite the DNA evidence under Ravish's fingernails, there was no possible way that Lucas could have been in the house on the night of the murder.
Mm-hmm. Back scratch.
Mm-hmm. So Kupik, the defender, set up a meeting with the district attorney's office, who launched an investigation into the lab that had tested the DNA to see if there could have been some kind of cross-contamination through improper use of tools. Mm-hmm. Perhaps Lucas's DNA had shown up in another case, and that was recently handled by the lab. You know, they're trying to like figure this out, but they found no evidence of any such errors. Police began to consider the possibility that, unlikely as it may have been, Lucas must have crossed paths with Ravish at some point in the days leading up to the murder, possibly at a back scratching convention.
They are very popular in whatever this area is that I can't remember because so many names have been thrown out since the beginning of this case. Got it. Cool.
San Jose. I'd go to a fucking back scratching convention.
And so somehow Lucas's DNA must have transferred to Ravish somehow. According to an article in Wired about Lucas's case, statistically, 1 in 5 people are walking around at any given moment with someone else's DNA under their fingernails, like somebody's DNA that they don't know that person. They've never like actually interacted with that person, but they've got their DNA under their fingernails.
Wow, weird.
Which like I basically
DNA,
don't have fingernails, so I'm in the clear.
Is DNA like airborne in that way?
Well, there's there's like epithelial DNA. There's like, you can have like trace amounts. Like basically our ability to test for DNA is getting so sensitive that it's picking up such tiny amounts that previously, were just insignificant. But now
we can get like a full fucking profile off of nothing.
Right.
Ugh, that's scary.
Yeah. So another instance of this, there's a 2011 case in Britain that was found to be similar to Lucas's. So a cab driver was arrested after his DNA was found under the fingernails of a woman who'd been murdered. But the cabbie insisted that he had never seen the woman before, and he must have had some kind of other alibi or something, because the defense attorney was able to successfully argue that the actual murderer must have taken that cab that day, picked up some of the cab driver's DNA, and then transferred the cabbie's DNA to the victim. And the jury was convinced by this, and the cabbie was acquitted.
Weird.
Are you really letting Ray chew on this pink pen cap right now?
I'm telling you, these pink pens, he just took his entire face in my pen cup looking for a pink pen, so...
You're also wearing a matching outfit.
He likes this, too. Sisters.
Oh, wow.
There were never such devoted cat sisters.
Lucy's devotion to her cats is alarming.
Yeah.
I have to love something.
True. Kenny just hit her head on her mic. That was good.
So in Lucas's case, his lawyer noted that traditional police work would never have tied him to the murder. But working backwards from the DNA, police were able to come up with a convincing story that would have almost definitely led to his conviction if she hadn't discovered this rock-solid alibi.
Right, and they only give a shit about their fucking stats. They just want to close cases
They just
in the
wanna close
easiest
it.
way fucking possible.
But also, like, you almost can't fault the police. You know what I mean? Like,
I can always fault the police.
they should have the police should have looked to see if he had an alibi.
And this was what, 2009? 2012. So we'll kind of get to it in my case, but since 2005, many studies and many pushbacks about DNA in like this exact way have been very much out there, both in and outside of court and in the scientific community. And that should be known in the investigative community as well. Yeah. And we can't just go,
it's not a
DNA
silver bullet.
smoking gun. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So she stated, quote, "It wasn't malicious." And I don't think it was malicious.
It was a lead. It's the system in and of itself is malicious, where a lead can turn into, like you keep saying, the silver bullet or the smoking gun without enough to corroborate that lead, because that shit's fucking lazy.
Right. Quote, "It was confirmation bias." They got the DNA and then they made up a story to fit it. Ultimately, it was actually Aaron Lunsford, the detective, who had that tenuous theory, who solved the mystery of how Lucas's DNA actually ended up at the crime scene. They both had tickets to the back scratching convention.
Knew it.
Jealous.
No. So the investigator finally was reviewing the medical records when he realized that the names of the paramedics who had taken Lucas to the hospital that night looked familiar.
No way.
My L.
They were the same paramedics who had responded to the crime scene and taken Ravish's vitals before pronouncing him dead.
Oh.
Ja.
Fully shook.
Right?
That transfer of DNA is...
Yeah.
It's a thing.
So the paramedics insisted that they had followed all sanitation protocols. They had changed gloves between patients. So they don't know how this DNA got transferred, but like clearly that is how it got transferred. That's the only connection between Lucas Anderson and the victim.
It got under Ravish's fingernails.
Fingernails.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Nuts, right? Isn't that crazy?
I will never trust DNA again. I
Right?
will never trust a DNA sample in a court
Yeah,
setting.
it has to be corroborated by other stuff.
Wow.
You know?
That's fucking wild.
Yeah.
That's really bonkers.
So the charges against Lucas were dropped and the case proceeded against the other two men. So that's kind of amazing that this guy, actually got out of the clutches of the justice system.
Especially after his quote, like, well, maybe I did do it. That's heartbreaking.
I know. So the defense the other defense, like the defense of the other two suspects, made an attempt to argue that Austin and Garcia's DNA also ended up at the house by accident, but this did not convince
that
anyone.
doesn't happen 3 separate times.
Yeah.
It's
barely
shocking that it
happens
happened once.
Yeah,
Including
exactly.
two people that knew each other and had a connection to the victim.
And didn't have an
And
alibi
had
for that
yeah,
night.
exactly.
And their cell
definitely
phones
did
were
it.
in the area.
Right.
And they also were home invaders, not just like
Professional home
Yeah.
invaders.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, no.
Both of the other two men were convicted. Although Lucas's situation is rare, Kupik believes that it made a subtle difference in the perception of the infallibility of DNA evidence. Quote, as defense attorneys, we used to get laughed out of the courtroom in closing arguments if we argued transfer. She says that it was hocus pocus, that it was made up fiction, but Lucas showed that it's real. Like
He proved it.
transfer is real.
Yeah.
This is actually a terrifying
Yeah.
acquittal.
Yeah. Lucas spent almost 6 months in jail before the charges against him were dropped and before they figured all this out, basically. Sadly, he returned to the streets after he was released and continues to struggle with his alcohol addiction. He has described his situation as, quote, gut-wrenching. And although he did admit to doubts after he was arrested, he has since said that deep down, I knew I didn't do it. Oh, I know. So that's my case. Fucking wild.
Hoping Lucas gets some support.
I know. Yeah.
I hope
That
so.
is insane. That
Yeah.
is one of the wildest cases I think you've ever done, which
Yeah.
says a lot.
Yeah. The paramedics twist at the end really got me.
Yeah.
So
Nice. Nice
that's
work.
my case.
Our
Thank you.
cases are really similar, but not the same, so don't worry.
Oh my God.
Like I said, my case is very, very similar to Kenyon's, but not the same, and takes place on a different continent, so we're safe. There's not a whole lot out there about the life of Anne-Marie Foy, but her death certainly made headlines in Liverpool, England, when on September 15th, 2005, Anne's body was found badly beaten and abandoned in a wooded area adjacent to Royal Liverpool Hospital. So this whole area was kind of like near a college campus, and there was a hospital there, so it was like pretty populated, and she was not like really hidden. She was found like the day after they believe.
So it's
that
just
she
like
was
a
killed.
little patch of trees, not
Yeah,
like
some
an
people are like, she was
isolated.
in a bush, like
Yeah.
barely hidden.
It was a bold crime.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cause of death had been ruled strangulation, and Anne-Marie was 46 years old. She had 4 children and a grandchild, and according to her youngest, had experienced much trauma throughout her lifetime, but the details of this trauma are not clear. Her circumstances, however, did result in substance use disorder and sex work to survive and feed her family. So among her colleagues in the sex industry, she was known to be loving, maternal, and always a protector of the younger women. There's like a little living memorial at the place where she was found, where her own children and also like sex workers in that area will still come and visit and like leave flowers and things like that. She was known to give the few pounds that she'd made that day to others on the block, like younger women that were out there working, to send them home safely and get them off the street for the night. But unfortunately, on the night of September 14th, Anne-Marie would not make it home safely herself. Forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Rogers performed the autopsy on Anne-Marie and discovered over 60 injuries sustained, with approximately 21 to the head and neck alone.
Ew.
A mark on her shoulder indicated that she had been stomped on with a boot, and an odd mark to her neck indicated that she had been like karate chopped, for lack of a better term, like straight in the neck with the side of the assailant's hand.
Oh, whoa.
The injuries showed a beating by hand, and evidence collected from Anne-Marie's body as well as the scene indicated that she really didn't struggle. She may have been unconscious by the time the beatings began. The drug that she struggled with was heroin, so that can absolutely leave you like very out of it,
Tired. And
it's kind of like falling asleep, barely conscious if you take enough. Some other odd bruising patterns on her body were attributed to a tree branch, which was found nearby with traces of her hair and blood on it.
So someone just violently, like wild animal.
They really went to town. This is really violent.
And
in like a disorganized way, too.
Yeah.
An unwrapped condom was left at the scene, but was not used. Like the condom wasn't a used condom. It was just a condom out of its wrapper. It didn't contain DNA. And for investigators, this kind of begged the question of like, why leave this here at all? It clearly wasn't put on at all or really used because they couldn't get DNA off of it. Granted, it was 2005, but like they still could have gotten something.
Well, yeah, maybe if someone went to use it.
Right.
And it never got to that point. Like maybe she was conscious and she was like, okay, open, use this. And he then attacked her.
Drifted out. And maybe the John got upset.
Right.
So like that's a theory. And also it's a theory that because of how intense the beating was and the strangulation, it's possible this was someone who knew her and left the condom there to make it look like a John attacked her.
Right.
So a year after Anne-Marie was discovered, a man named Kevin Kilshaw wandered into a Liverpool police station and confessed to killing her. He claimed that he had been involved in a fight with a prostitute, his words, over money, and had recently discovered that she was dead. Kevin was arrested and an investigation was launched, one that would find holes in his account of the evening's events, no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and a solid alibi for the evening in question.
What?
The fuck?
A psychiatric evaluation would reveal that Kevin suffered severely from untreated mental illness that led to delusions and fabrications, that this is not the first time he'd ever done something like this.
Like confessed to something he clearly did not
confession.
do.
After nearly a year of investigations and court hearings into someone who definitely did not do it, the case against Kevin was dropped. So all of that time was just lost.
Wasted.
Yep. Then in April of 2008, so now it's been 3 years since she was found, a 38-year-old man from Netherton was also arrested, questioned, and then immediately bailed, and the case went cold once again because there was not enough evidence against this new suspect to make charges stick. And I couldn't even find this person's name. Like, this was just mentioned in a couple of articles as
one other lead that didn't
one
quite
other
pan
failed
out.
lead. So years passed, and it seemed that this case might not be solved. But as the years went on, DNA technology also evolved, and by 2011, smaller samples could be tested for at least partial profiles that were not possible at the time of Anne-Marie's death. Some DNA was present on Anne-Marie, both under her fingernails and a little bit on like the buttons of her cardigan. It had been logged into evidence, like the clippings and her clothing. So all of that DNA was still available, but it didn't ping any successful DNA profile that could be mapped. So fingernail clippings were analyzed again in 2011 and discovered trace amounts of DNA that were run through a database in the UK and pinged one particular suspect, 65-year-old David Butler of Albert Grove. David was a retired taxi driver who owned his distinctive striped cab. So even though he wasn't really like driving very often, It used to be his full-time job. I think he still did take some fares on occasion because he owned his taxi, and I think he maintained his license, but he was
worked
primarily
for
retired.
himself, too. So he's
His
not,
DNA was
like,
logged
being
because he
tracked the
willingly
same.
provided it years earlier to rule him out in a robbery of his mother's home. He used to live with his mom. There was a break-in at the home, and both him and his mother gave DNA in that case to be like, it wasn't staged. I didn't do this. So in an interview, sorry?
I was just having a thought. I just thought, like, I mean, obviously there's like personal privacy issues with this. And literally earlier in this episode, I talked about how I would have some qualms about giving my own DNA to a database. But
Here we are.
But hypocritically, maybe all like taxi drivers and Uber and Lyft drivers should have to provide DNA samples.
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope, but I can see the potential preventative or positive outcome of something like that.
Right.
I mean, but if then that's the case, then every fucking cop has to do it. Like anyone who's in some sort of like public facing service.
Every man.
Yeah, let's just do that.
Yeah, that would solve a lot of murders.
It
It
Literally would.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, I have those instincts too to be like, why don't these folks who get to be alone in a car and in complete control over individuals have more accountability or like preventative measures? I get that.
Privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that also opens the door
It's
to
a can of worms.
what we're talking about here.
Exactly. Yeah. So in an interview with BBC News, David said, quote, "There was a knock at the door in the early hours of the morning saying I was being arrested for murder. I asked, what evidence have you got? And they said they thought it was my DNA. I thought, I'll prove I'm not a suspect, but it didn't pan out that way. DNA has become the magic bullet for the police. They thought it was my DNA, ergo, it must be me."
Uh-oh.
With DNA evidence and CCTV footage of a cab matching the description of David's near the scene.
It's a cab.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Some articles say his distinctive cab, but it's like, it's still a cab. Like all cabs are distinctive in their very nature because you need to be able to identify that they're a cab. So I feel like that's kind of misleading. But yes. Yeah. The police charged him formally with the murder of Anne-Marie Foy. The DNA sample was only a partial match of poor quality, and experts at the time said they could neither say that he was guilty nor rule him out. So he's just, it's maybe. He's just a big gray blob
just a Pandora's
maybe.
Box of DNA.
Big gray blob
baby. So the CCTV footage was also questionable at best and later discredited entirely because of an inability to match the plates. Like there was no
so
like
it was
CCTV.
Just a cab.
It could have been his, but it probably
can't rule
wasn't.
In, can't rule out.
Can't rule it in, can't rule it out, and they could not get there's no actual enhance button on CCTV footage. So if you can't get a clear plate, you zoom in and it's just more pixelated and terrible. So they couldn't figure it out. So the story that the Crown was building against David was weak, but he did admit to having paid for sex in the past, but maintained that he had never had any contact with Anne-Marie. Rumors among women in Anne-Marie's beat began to circulate about an altercation that she'd had in a cab several weeks before her death, wherein she tried to lift a John's wallet, got caught, and he assaulted her in his cab. So some believed this could have been David and that he later returned to further brutalize Anne-Marie as like punishment or revenge for trying to steal from him.
Well, it could have been David or it could have been
anyone else that she maybe tried to pickpocket.
Somebody else who had access to a cab.
Exactly. So that's kind of like the two versions of that tidbit of information where it's like, yes, Anne-Marie had been known to try and get a little more because it's, obviously it's a survival tactic.
Yeah.
So if she had potentially pickpocketed David, maybe he came back angry, or she pickpocketed a different John and he caught her and got pissed. She already got beaten up in a cab.
Yeah.
It's a highly dangerous job. Who's to say that didn't happen again? So David still staunchly denied this claim, citing not only his incredibly passive nature, which okay, whatever, but his advanced COPD, which is basically like an updated term for emphysema. It's like emphysema and chronic bronchitis. It's like really bad. It's a serious lung condition that would absolutely alter your ability to carry out rigorous tasks like the extreme violence against Anne-Marie. Like she was so badly beaten that it would have taken...
Somebody went bananas.
Yes. Time and consistent sustainable energy to be able to carry out that kind of a murder.
It wasn't just shooting someone.
Exactly.
It was a physical act.
Exactly.
The stomping, the tree branch.
Yeah, and the COPD is not something he made up. Like, he is treated medically for it. It is confirmed that he has it. So what's more convincing in this defense, however, is a skin condition that David suffers from that causes extreme flakiness. His loved ones literally nicknamed him Flaky.
Oh, God.
I have to go.
And though the name of the condition wasn't listed...
You just finish out without me.
Each
You guys got
article,
this.
You got this,
I
right?
need to go moisturize.
Yeah. Each article mentioned how rare this condition is, even though they didn't like specifically name which condition he had. But it makes me wonder if he suffered from something like Netherton syndrome or something similar. Because of this condition,
Wasn't he from Netherton?
he's from. He's
Wasn't
not
this
from
in
Netherton. He's from
Netherton?
Albert Grove, but there was another.
There was a Netherton.
the guy who confessed, the Kevin guy who
Oh.
confessed, was from Netherton.
Okay.
It all circles back.
And I'm sorry. And I'm not making fun of people with skin conditions. I'm just...
No.
The flaky nickname
Yeah.
was what got me. That's
a little-
really gross.
It's a little much.
Yeah.
So, because of this condition, his skin would shed in large portions, which is counter to the trace amounts of DNA found on Anne-Marie. So, were David the killer and in close enough contact to have killed her by choking and beating her
Flakes.
or karate chopping
There'd be
her,
flakes.
much more of his DNA would have shed from his body and landed on Anne-Marie for collection. So, there's strike 5, 6, and 7 against this guy being the culprit.
Unless he had like a Dexter suit on.
I don't know. So David went to
Covered in duct
trial,
tape.
and he was held in jail for the duration of like the investigation and the trial. So he was just sitting in jail, like on remand. David's defense counsel, Michael Woolkind, said the DNA findings were not done to the high standards of the forensic regulator, and he would call scientists who would refute the evidence. Quote, the idea that he violently attacked her is beyond belief, and unsafe science cannot change that fact. Throughout the trial, David maintained his innocence as well as seemingly deep sadness for what had happened to Anne-Marie. He said, quote, I just want to reiterate that what's gone on is wrong, and I will say to the day I die that I did not do this, and I'm flabbergasted by it all. While the prosecution pushed that the DNA meant the two had come in contact the day that she died, further review debunked this as well. The DNA samples from Anne-Marie's nails were a complex mixture of profiles, and only a partial match was found with Butler's DNA. Further analysis of the initial examination notes also revealed that Anne-Marie had been wearing glittery nail polish
Like your toes.
and my fingers, which is significant
Which
here.
are beautiful.
Thank you. Quote, that is going to retain more DNA for a longer time when there isn't like a very smooth top coat over the top like there is on mine. Because there is more opportunity and more things for DNA to stick to because it's a rough surface.
Yeah.
This was mentioned by Sue Pope, who is a DNA expert who worked on the case. And of course, David, I don't know why it says Arthur, David's skin condition, not only making it improbable that direct contact would leave so little DNA on Anne-Marie, but also explaining how a bit of DNA could have coincidentally wound up on her. Quote, he was depositing a lot more cells than you might expect from a single touch.
Oh, he was like a super spreader of his own DNA because of the flakiness.
Exactly. So
Uncle Flaky.
this DNA expert, Sue Pope, is like, he's more likely, like you said, to have transfer, and he occasionally drives a cab, comes in contact with potentially other cab drivers, comes in contact with cash, coins that are exchanged among individuals. Yes, I love this interpretive, flaky skin dance you're doing.
For listeners, Lucy and I are interpretive flaky skin dancing.
And I'm just ignoring it to get through the last paragraph of this funny shit. So,
Salt
the
Bae.
findings argued...
Salt Bay.
Flake Bay.
Flake Bay. The findings, argued the defense, meant that Butler's DNA could have found its way onto Anne Marie's hands and the buttons, and by entirely innocent means, for example, by handling coins that had previously been touched by David Butler. And they leaned pretty heavily into the skin could have been transferred through cash, and that's how it ended up on her hands. And then potentially she touches her buttons, it gets on her buttons. It's nowhere else. She's taking cabs frequently. I don't think she had her own car. So he says he never came in contact with her, but he could have picked her up on a fare randomly and just not recognized her or remembered that he did. There's all kinds of ways that could have happened. Right. So after 8 months of jail and 11 hours of deliberation, David was acquitted of all charges. He returned to his cell to collect his few belongings and then went home to sleep in his own bed. This was a win for David, but a return to square one for Anne Marie's family, and they were obviously very sad.
It's also when you go through it in detail, you can see how he was acquitted. But if you aren't taking the time, if you're only reading the headlines and you're not taking the time to really go into the details, I could see it not being a really full exoneration of him in the public eye.
Yeah,
you know what
for
I mean?
Sure. And
of suspicion always lingering.
Right.
Yeah.
From what I could tell, I think the surviving family of Anne Marie weren't upset that he was acquitted. I think they were just well, shit. We've gone through 4 suspects. We still have no idea who did this. It's now been, 6 years at the time of this trial in 2011. It's are we ever gonna know?
Yeah.
And that would be devastating.
So
even if you are glad that the wrong person isn't going to jail for a crime they didn't commit, that emotion would be very, very complicated. And David recognized the pain that this caused them as well. He said in an interview, quote, "We have to remember there were victims here, and we all saw Anne Marie's family and their reaction afterwards. Some quickly left the courtroom in tears, and I didn't expect anything else. No one should lose their mother in those circumstances, and I wish them every success in getting justice. This was another false dawn for them, which must have been hard, but it has to be the right man, and it wasn't here. It wasn't me."
I feel showing that empathy too, and always remembering that it's really about the victim and the victim's family. While he was also, somewhat victimized, having been accused and been in jail for a long time.
He went through. He sat in jail for 8
victimized.
months. And,
Right.
And as an
but he
older
wasn't
man,
brutally murdered either.
No, he wasn't.
But just the fact that he has that empathy for the victim and the victim's family, I think, is a good sign.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people who can't show that kind of empathy, you'd be more suspicious of them.
So unfortunately, to this day, the case runs cold, and we honestly may never know what truly happened to Anne Marie that night, because there's just not enough DNA, even with the technology that we have.
And there are just too many partial profiles. Too much of a jumble.
Right. And I mean, in the sex work industry, you are going to come in contact with multiple individuals, likely in within a day as well. So that would make it that much more challenging if there isn't any
Also, just spending more time on the street and being a drug user.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so many ways for her to have acquired mixed profiles of a bunch of different DNA just through her everyday lifestyle.
And that kind of ties back to Kenyon's point previously that these tests have gotten so sensitive that it's actually possibly in a lot of cases becoming a detriment to the solving of a crime.
There might need to be some sort of floor, some sort of threshold.
Yeah,
where
you need to have a minimum size sample to be able to even enter it into evidence in a way that is solid, because clearly they entered this they hinged basically, with the CCTV footage too, but that ended up getting tossed out. But they hinged this entire case on DNA that was...
At the same time, if you have a tiny little bit and you put it in, and then that leads you to a bunch of corroborating evidence.
That's the thing is, I don't mind it being a lead. You know, in your case, I get why they followed that lead, because that DNA was there. So, of course, you have to follow that lead.
Even in this case, you kind of get why they followed that lead. Because
of course, the DNA was there, so you follow the lead. But unless you have enough to, like in your case, the woman who said, they kind of abandoned traditional detective work.
Right.
It's like you have to do that part of it too to corroborate this lead. It's not a smoking gun. It's an arrow.
It's a chili lamb.
It's a chili lamb in a direction.
Right. Right.
So
well, we
it's
just
complex.
figured out investigations.
Yep.
We solved it. Good case. Good work.
Yeah, this was hard to find cases for, but these cases are definitely very interesting and fascinating. And I am glad that in both of these cases we covered, the wrongly convicted person
Was eventually freed, yeah.
was eventually acquitted, right, or freed. But it begs the question, how often is that not happening?
I'm glad that Paul Schultz made us take a good hard look at DNA evidence because it's very easy to look at that and be like, well, DNA doesn't lie.
DNA was found
But it's
under the fingernails. Yeah, exactly.
But
Done.
actually, it may not lie, but it can be super
Deceiving.
duper misleading.
Deceptive, if you will.
Well, thank you to our fan picker, Paul Schultz, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.